there is a question almost no one asks, even though it quietly shapes the entire course of their life. Why is it that you can make a promise to yourself in complete sincerity and then break it only hours later? Why does motivation disappear? Why do good intentions collapse under ordinary moments? Most people blame laziness. Some blame a lack of willpower. Others believe they simply aren't disciplined enough. But what if all of them are looking in the wrong place? Ancient philosophers taught that every visible action begins with an invisible law operating inside the mind. Long before modern psychology studied habits, they understood that a divided mind can never produce a disciplined life. The tragedy is that almost no one is taught these principles anymore. In this audiobook, you'll discover why self-betrayal is not a character flaw, but the predictable result of hidden mental laws that govern every decision you make. Once you see these laws, you will never look at discipline, motivation, or personal transformation the same way again. Because the greatest promise you ever break is not to the world. It is to yourself. Chapter 1. The Invisible Habit of Self-Betrayal. Most people believe discipline is lost in dramatic moments. They imagine failure begins with a catastrophic mistake, a major setback, a life-changing decision. But that is not how it happens. Discipline rarely dies all at once. It disappears quietly. One ignored alarm, one skipped workout, one unfinished task, one promise postponed until tomorrow. Then another, and another. That is the invisible habit of self-betrayal. The tragedy is not that you broke a promise. The tragedy is that your mind was watching. Every promise you make creates an expectation inside you. Every promise you break creates evidence. And your subconscious does not judge you by your intentions. It judges you by your repeated behavior. That is the hidden law. Every promise shapes the person who makes it. Read those words again and in your mind. Every promise shapes the person who makes it, whether you keep it or not. This is why two people can make the exact same goal, yet only one becomes transformed. The difference isn't intelligence, it isn't talent, it isn't luck, it is trust. Not trust from other people. Trust in yourself, because every time you do what you said you would do, even when nobody is watching, your subconscious records a simple message. My word matters. But every time you abandon your own commitment, another message is recorded. My words don't really mean anything. That message spreads, slowly, quietly, until it reaches every part of your life. You have a choice. You can dismiss this as something small, or you can recognize it for what it truly is. The beginning of your identity. Consider something as ordinary as setting an alarm for 6 in the morning. The alarm rings. Immediately, two versions of yourself appear. One remembers the promise made the night before. The other whispers something comforting. 5 more minutes. Tomorrow will be different. You deserve the rest. Most people believe the decision is about sleep. It isn't. The real decision is about identity. When you hit snooze, nothing dramatic happens. The world doesn't end. No one criticizes you. No one even knows. But your subconscious knows. It quietly updates its understanding of who you are. Not someone who intended to wake up. Someone who negotiates with their own commitments. That is why self-betrayal is so dangerous. It hides inside ordinary moments. It wears the mask of harmless delay. That's the key. Discipline is not tested when life is difficult. Discipline is tested when excuses sound reasonable. You don't need their permission. You don't need someone to congratulate you for getting out of bed. You don't need applause for honoring your own word. Because the greatest audience is always the one inside your own mind. Every action is being recorded. Every repetition becomes identity. Every promise shapes the person who makes it. Ancient philosophers understood something modern culture often ignores. Character is built long before achievement is visible. A tree grows underground before anyone notices its height. Your character develops the same way. Quietly. Invisible. Every kept promise strengthens unseen roots. Every broken promise weakens them. Then one day, life brings pressure, stress, failure, temptation. And suddenly, people wonder why they collapse. They think the pressure broke them. It didn't. Pressure simply revealed the structure they had been building for years. The invisible always becomes visible. That law never changes. Now consider confidence. Most people chase confidence as if it were an emotion. They wait to feel ready. They wait to believe in themselves. They wait until fear disappears. But confidence does not appear first. Evidence comes first. Confidence follows. That is why someone who walks for 20 minutes every morning, without missing a day, often develops more confidence than someone who talks endlessly about changing their life. The walk itself is not magical. The evidence is. Every completed action tells the subconscious something powerful. I keep my word. Again, and again, and again. Trust is built one action at a time. Notice that this principle applies everywhere, not just fitness. Suppose you decide to read 10 pages every evening. The goal is small, almost insignificant. Yet after 30 days, something unexpected happens. You begin trusting yourself. Not because 10 pages changed your intelligence overnight, because 30 kept promises changed your identity. The ancient teachers often spoke about hidden causes producing visible effects. Modern psychology gives different names to the same phenomenon. Identity, self-image, behavioral conditioning. Different language, same principle. Everything begins long before anyone notices. That's the key. The person who appears disciplined did not suddenly become disciplined. They accumulated evidence, day after day, choice after choice, promise after promise. You have a choice. Stop chasing motivation. Start collecting evidence. There is another consequence of self-betrayal that few people recognize. It never stays in one area. It spreads. Imagine avoiding one difficult conversation. Perhaps you postpone asking for a promotion. Perhaps you delay apologizing to someone you love. Perhaps you refuse to make an important decision. At first, it seems isolated. Just one conversation. Just one delay. But the subconscious notices something deeper. It learns that discomfort leads to avoidance. Soon, the pattern expands. Now, difficult emails are postponed. Opportunities are ignored. Health problems are delayed. Dreams remain ideas. One betrayal becomes a habit. A habit becomes an identity. An identity becomes a life. The smallest betrayal is never small. That sentence deserves your attention, because it explains why seemingly insignificant moments shape extraordinary futures. The world teaches you to focus on major achievements. Ancient wisdom teaches you to focus on daily integrity. One creates appearances, the other creates character. And character always wins in the end. It's not about laziness, it's about conditioning. It's not about motivation, it's about integrity. It's not about perfection, it's about repetition. Every promise shapes the person who makes it. Trust is built one action at a time. The smallest betrayal is never small. These are not simply memorable phrases. They are hidden laws operating beneath your daily life, whether you recognize them or not. So begin differently. Choose one promise, not an impossible promise, not one designed to impress others. One promise you can honor today, then honor it tomorrow, then again the next day. Do not underestimate what appears small. Great transformations are never built from dramatic moments. They are built from quiet consistency. Every kept promise strengthens the invisible foundation of your character. Every act of integrity becomes another stone beneath the life you're building. Because before you can master the world around you, you must stop betraying the world within you. Chapter 2. The Forgotten Law That Governs Every Promise. If you have ever asked yourself, why do I keep doing the opposite of what I know I should do? You're asking one of the oldest questions in human history. Most people believe the answer is simple. They say you need more discipline, more motivation, more willpower. But ancient wisdom points in a different direction. It says every visible action is merely the final expression of something invisible. Every effect has a cause. Every branch grows from a root. Every action follows an inner law. That is why two people can read the same book, hear the same advice, set the same goal, and begin with the same enthusiasm, yet arrive at completely different destinations. The difference is rarely the goal itself. The difference is the hidden law operating beneath it. The inner law always governs the outer result. Everything you repeatedly do is first approved by the image you hold of yourself. Think about that carefully. Your habits do not begin with your hands. They begin with your beliefs. Your schedule does not shape your identity nearly as much as your identity shapes your schedule. That is why people often become trapped in cycles they cannot explain. They sincerely want a better life. They sincerely want to become healthier, more disciplined, more successful, more focused. Their intentions are genuine, yet their results never change. Why? Because intention is only the surface. Identity is the foundation. Imagine a person who dreams of financial freedom. They listen to podcasts, they read books, they make detailed plans. They even work harder than everyone around them. But hidden beneath every conscious decision is a quiet belief they rarely notice. People like me never become wealthy. Money always slips away. I'm just not good with finances. Those thoughts may never be spoken aloud. Sometimes they are not even fully conscious. Yet they silently govern behavior. The person hesitates before investing, avoids asking for better opportunities, undervalues their own work, spends impulsively after every small success. Then they wonder why nothing changes. The problem was never the plan. The problem was the hidden law beneath the plan. The inner law always governs the outer result. This principle appears everywhere. A person wants a healthy body, but secretly identifies as someone who lacks self-control. A student wants academic success, but quietly believes they are not intelligent enough. A business owner wants growth, but fears visibility because success feels unfamiliar. Each person believes they are fighting external circumstances. In reality, they are obeying internal assumptions. That is the key. You cannot consistently behave in ways that contradict the identity you unconsciously protect. For a short time, perhaps. For a week. Maybe a month. But eventually, behavior returns to the level of belief. Ancient philosophers described this as living according to one's inner nature. Modern psychology often calls it self-image. Different words. The same timeless principle. You have a choice. You can continue fighting symptoms, or you can begin examining causes, because causes always possess greater power than effects. This brings us to one of the greatest misunderstandings about discipline. People worship willpower. They imagine success belongs to those with extraordinary mental strength. But willpower is temporary. Programming is persistent. Think about how often people begin a new diet. On Monday morning, motivation is high. The refrigerator is cleaned. Healthy meals are prepared. A fresh start feels exciting. Then Wednesday arrives. Stress appears. Fatigue appears. Old cravings return. By Friday, the entire plan has collapsed. Most people conclude they lack discipline, but that conclusion is incomplete. They did not lose because temptation was stronger. They lost because their unconscious identity remained unchanged. Deep inside, they still saw themselves as someone who always quits. Someone who always starts over next Monday. Someone who believes consistency belongs to other people. Willpower tried to pull them forward. Identity quietly pulled them back. And identity almost always wins. The law operates whether you understand it or not. Gravity does not ask whether you believe in it. Neither do psychological laws. You can ignore them, argue against them, pretend they do not exist. They continue operating anyway. That is why knowledge alone rarely transforms a life. How many successful books have you read? How many inspiring videos have you watched? How many powerful ideas have you agreed with? Yet information alone rarely creates lasting change. Because information speaks to the conscious mind, identity speaks to the unconscious. And the unconscious directs most behavior long before conscious thought catches up. That realization should not discourage you. It should liberate you. Because if unconscious patterns were learned, they can also be rewritten. But first, they must become visible. Most people never question the voice inside their own mind. They assume every thought is true. Every fear is accurate. Every excuse is reasonable. Ancient teachers warned against this. They encouraged observation before reaction, awareness before action, because the mind cannot transform what it refuses to see. Imagine someone who says every morning, "I don't have enough time." At first, the sentence sounds factual, but after observing carefully, they notice something. Each day begins with 20 minutes of scrolling through social media. Another 30 minutes disappear through unnecessary distractions. Suddenly, the problem is no longer time. The problem is unconscious behavior. Awareness changes everything. Or consider someone who repeatedly says, "I'll start tomorrow." The statement seems harmless until they realize tomorrow has become a permanent destination. The excuse was automatic, invisible, repeated thousands of times. Once it becomes visible, something remarkable happens. choice returns. That is real freedom, not the absence of difficulty, the presence of awareness. What becomes visible becomes changeable. That sentence may be the turning point of this entire audiobook, because transformation never begins with force. It begins with seeing clearly. You cannot replace a hidden pattern. You cannot challenge an invisible belief. You cannot rewrite a story you refuse to acknowledge. First, you observe. Then, you question. Then, you choose. That's the key. The next time you break a promise to yourself, resist the urge to criticize yourself immediately. Instead, become curious. Ask a different question. What belief made this action feel reasonable? What identity was I protecting? What hidden law was I following? Those questions carry more power than self-judgment ever will. Because judgment creates shame. Awareness creates freedom. Remember this: every action is a mirror. Every habit reveals a belief. Every repeated decision exposes an inner law. The outer world is constantly reflecting the invisible architecture of your mind. You have a choice. You can spend your life fighting behaviors one by one, or you can discover the hidden laws producing those behaviors in the first place. One approach creates endless struggle. The other creates lasting transformation. The inner law always governs the outer result. The law operates whether you understand it or not. What becomes visible becomes changeable. These are not merely ideas. They are principles that quietly shape every promise you keep, every promise you break, and every future version of yourself. Now that you understand there is an invisible law beneath every action, another question naturally emerges. If hidden beliefs govern our lives, then what exactly is the mind, and why does it so often work against itself? That is where our journey continues. Chapter 3. The divided mind cannot build an undivided life. There is a conflict taking place inside almost every human being. It is silent, invisible, often unnoticed. Yet it determines far more than intelligence, education, or talent ever will. It is the conflict between what you say you want and what your mind has been trained to pursue. Most people believe they have one mind. Ancient wisdom suggests something different. It teaches that the mind can become divided. One part reaches toward growth. Another clings to comfort. One part dreams about the future. Another refuses to release the familiar past. One part wants discipline. Another quietly protects old habits. When these forces pull in opposite directions, life becomes inconsistent. Not because you lack potential, because your energy is being spent fighting yourself. A divided mind creates divided results. That is one of the oldest psychological laws ever observed. And once you see it, you begin recognizing it everywhere. Consider someone who says they want peace. They speak about slowing down, living intentionally, reducing stress, finding clarity. But every morning begins with alarming headlines. Every lunch break is filled with arguments on social media. Every evening ends with videos designed to provoke anger, fear, or outrage. Then they wonder why their mind feels restless. The contradiction is invisible because the actions seem unrelated. But they are deeply connected. You cannot feed your mind chaos all day and expect peace by night. The mind does not separate information into neat categories. It absorbs patterns. It adapts to repetition. It becomes familiar with whatever you repeatedly expose it to. That is why peace is not merely an emotion. It is a consequence of mental nutrition. You have a choice. You can consume confusion, or you can cultivate clarity. Every hour, that choice is being made, whether consciously or unconsciously. The divided mind is exhausting because it is constantly negotiating with itself. You promise to exercise, then negotiate. You promise to finish the project, then negotiate. You promise to stop procrastinating, then negotiate again. Eventually, the negotiation becomes more familiar than the action itself. That is how inconsistency becomes normal. The ancient philosophers often described inner harmony as the foundation of strength. Not because harmony feels pleasant, because harmony eliminates wasted energy. Imagine trying to row a boat with one oar pushing forward while the other pushes backward. You may work incredibly hard. You may become exhausted, but you will never travel very far. Many people live exactly this way, working harder every year, feeling busier every month, yet secretly wondering why meaningful progress never arrives. Their effort is real. Their direction is divided. A divided mind creates divided results. This is why clarity matters more than intensity. Intensity without alignment quickly becomes burnout. Alignment creates sustainable progress. There is another force quietly contributing to this division, one so common that many people never question it. Attention. Ancient teachers understood that attention is not simply what you look at. Attention is what shapes you. Modern neuroscience now confirms what philosophers observed thousands of years ago. Repeated attention physically changes the brain. The pathways you strengthen become easier to travel tomorrow. That means every moment of focus is also a moment of construction. You're always building something, even when you believe you're simply passing time. Where attention goes, identity follows. Read that slowly. Where attention goes, identity follows. Because your attention tells your brain what matters. If your attention repeatedly moves toward fear, fear becomes familiar. If your attention repeatedly moves toward comparison, comparison becomes automatic. If your attention repeatedly moves toward discipline, discipline gradually feels natural. Most people protect their money more carefully than their attention. Yet attention is infinitely more valuable. Money can be recovered. Lost attention cannot. Every notification asks for a small piece of your mind. Every advertisement competes for your awareness. Every headline demands emotional energy. Individually, they appear insignificant. Together, they create fragmentation. Imagine sitting down to complete one meaningful hour of focused work. Within minutes, your phone vibrates. You check one message, then another. A notification appears. A short video catches your eye. Someone comments on your post. Before you realize what happened, 45 minutes have disappeared. The work remains unfinished. Your concentration feels weak. You conclude that you lack discipline. But perhaps the problem was never discipline. Perhaps your attention had been trained to expect interruption. The modern world profits from distraction. Your future depends upon protecting attention. That's the key. Attention is no longer merely a tool. It is your most valuable form of personal power. Because whatever repeatedly captures your attention eventually begins directing your behavior. This brings us to another forgotten truth. Every distraction strengthens a competing version of yourself. Most people imagine distractions simply waste time. Ancient wisdom reveals something deeper. Distractions train identity. Each evening presents a quiet decision. One version of yourself wants to read, reflect, learn, practice, sleep well, prepare for tomorrow. Another version seeks immediate comfort, endless scrolling, mindless entertainment, constant stimulation. Neither decision seems important in isolation, but identity is never formed in isolation. Identity is formed through repetition. Imagine making the same choice every evening for 5 years. Would those lives look identical? Of course not. One would accumulate knowledge, health, confidence, focus. The other would accumulate distraction, regret, mental fatigue, unfinished ambitions. Not because of one evening, because of thousands. You become what repeatedly captures your mind. Notice that the ancient teachers rarely spoke about dramatic transformations. They spoke about daily influence, because influence becomes habit. Habit becomes character. Character becomes destiny. That sequence never changes. You have a choice. You cannot control every thought that enters your mind, but you can become more selective about what you repeatedly invite inside. You don't need their permission. You do not need permission to silence unnecessary notifications. You do not need permission to protect your mornings. You do not need permission to say no to endless distraction. You do not need permission to value your own attention, because no one else will protect it for you. The strongest minds are not those that never become distracted. They are those that repeatedly return. Again, and again, and again. Focus is less about perfection than recovery. Every time you gently bring your attention back to what matters, you strengthen the identity of someone who chooses consciously instead of reacting automatically. That is how self-mastery is built, not through one heroic decision. Through thousands of ordinary returns. Every moment you reclaim your attention, you reclaim a piece of yourself. It's not about intelligence, it's about direction. It's not about working longer, it's about thinking more clearly. It's not about removing every distraction. It's about refusing to let distraction become your identity. Remember these principles. A divided mind creates divided results. Where attention goes, identity follows. You become what repeatedly captures your mind. These are not motivational slogans. They are invisible laws governing every day of your life. The quality of your future will not be determined by the occasional extraordinary decision. It will be determined by what repeatedly receives your attention. Because the mind always grows toward whatever it consistently observes. Now another question naturally appears. If attention shapes identity, can identity itself be deliberately transformed? Can the mind be retrained instead of merely controlled? The ancient teachers believed it could. They called this process one of humanity's greatest powers, mental transmutation. And that is where our journey continues. Chapter 4. Thoughts become identity long before they become actions. If you want to understand why your life repeatedly follows the same patterns, you must stop looking only at your actions. Look deeper. Every action has a history. Before every habit, there was a thought. Before every decision, there was an interpretation. Before every identity, There was a story repeated so many times that it no longer sounded like a story. It sounded like the truth. Ancient wisdom has always insisted that the greatest battles are not fought in the outer world. They are fought in the silent conversations taking place inside the mind. Long before your hands move, long before your feet take a step, long before anyone else can see what you are about to become, your thoughts have already begun shaping the outcome. That is why transformation never starts with behavior. It starts with awareness of the thoughts that quietly create behavior. Identity is thought repeated. This principle is simple, but it is far from easy. Because most people do not realize how often they are introducing themselves to themselves. Listen carefully to your inner dialogue for a single day. I've never been disciplined. I'm always late. I'm terrible with money. I'm just not a confident person. I always give up. At first, these statements seem harmless. They feel like observations. But they are not observations. They are instructions. Every time you repeat them, your subconscious treats them as evidence. Not because they are true, because they are familiar. The subconscious has one primary responsibility: to preserve consistency. It prefers the familiar over the beneficial. That is why people often remain trapped in identities they secretly dislike. The identity is painful, but it is predictable, and the subconscious values predictability. Think about a person who repeatedly says, "I'm terrible at consistency." Perhaps they laugh after saying it. Perhaps they call it honesty. Perhaps other people even agree. But every repetition strengthens the identity. Soon, they stop expecting themselves to follow through. Then, they stop trying as seriously as they once did. Eventually, inconsistency no longer feels like failure. It feels natural. Do you see what happened? The thought became the identity. The identity became the behavior. The behavior became the evidence. Then, the evidence reinforced the original thought. A perfect circle. One that many people spend decades repeating without ever recognizing. Identity is thought repeated. You have a choice. You can continue repeating stories written by your past. Or you can begin writing new ones through your present actions. That is the key. The most powerful conversations in your life are the ones no one else hears. The ancient philosophers understood that words possess creative power, not because words are magical, but because words organize attention. Attention influences emotion. Emotion influences behavior. Behavior shapes identity. The chain begins long before action. That is why careless self-talk is never truly careless. Every sentence either strengthens the person you wish to become or strengthens the person you are trying to leave behind. This brings us to another forgotten principle. Most people believe dramatic moments change lives. Ancient wisdom suggests something quieter. It teaches that repetition changes lives. One inspiring speech rarely transforms someone. One motivational video rarely creates lasting discipline. One emotional decision rarely rewrites identity. Transformation happens through repetition. Because repetition is the language of the subconscious. Repetition writes reality. Think about how children learn to speak. Not through one lesson, through thousands of repetitions. Think about musicians, athletes, artists, master craftsmen. They repeat movements until conscious effort disappears. The same principle governs identity. Every repeated thought becomes easier to think again. Every repeated behavior becomes easier to perform again. Every repeated emotion becomes easier to feel again. Your brain is constantly asking one silent question: what should become automatic? Whatever you repeat becomes the answer. This explains why so many people fail after moments of extraordinary motivation. They mistake emotional intensity for permanent change. They attend one seminar, watch one documentary, read one life-changing book. For a few days, everything feels different. Then life returns to normal. Why? Because intensity creates temporary excitement. Repetition creates permanent identity. Without repetition, inspiration fades. With repetition, transformation becomes inevitable. Imagine someone who stands before a mirror every morning and quietly says, "I keep my promises." If those words remain empty, nothing changes. But if they are followed by one kept promise, then another, the statement slowly gains credibility. Eventually, it no longer feels like an affirmation. It feels like a description. That is how identity changes, not through wishing, through repeated alignment between thought and action. Thought alone is incomplete. Action alone is unstable. Together, they create transformation. That's the key. Never separate what you repeatedly think from what you repeatedly do. Because together, they become who you repeatedly are. You don't need their permission. No one needs to approve the story you choose to tell yourself. No one can rewrite your identity except you. Not your family. Not your past. Not your failures. Not your critics. Their voices matter only when they become your voice. There is another principle the ancient teachers understood with remarkable clarity. Every action begins as a mental rehearsal. Before the architect builds the house, he sees it. Before the musician performs, she hears it internally. Before the athlete competes, the movement has already been practiced in the imagination countless times. The outer performance is simply the visible expression of an invisible rehearsal. Modern neuroscience has uncovered something astonishing. The brain often activates similar neural pathways when vividly imagining an action as when physically performing it. The ancient philosophers did not possess brain scans, yet they observed the same truth through careful attention to human nature. They understood that imagination is not an escape from reality. It is often the blueprint for reality. Everything begins in the mind. Think of an Olympic athlete standing quietly before competition. To an observer, they appear perfectly still. But inside, they are moving. They are seeing every movement, feeling every motion, experiencing success before stepping onto the field. Why? Because the mind performs before the body follows. The same principle applies to ordinary life. Before you walk into an important meeting, you rehearse it. Before you have a difficult conversation, you rehearse it. Before you ask someone for an opportunity, you rehearse it. The question is not whether you rehearse. The question is what you rehearse. Many people unknowingly practice failure every day. They imagine rejection, embarrassment, mistakes, humiliation. Then they wonder why anxiety feels so powerful. The subconscious cannot easily distinguish between repeated imagination and repeated expectation. If you constantly rehearse defeat, confidence never has the opportunity to grow. But imagine reversing the process. Instead of rehearsing excuses, Rehearse courage. Instead of rehearsing failure, rehearse calm execution. Instead of imagining yourself quitting halfway, imagine yourself finishing. Not once, repeatedly, again, again, again. Because repetition writes reality. This does not mean pretending difficulties do not exist. It means choosing which future deserves your attention. You have a choice. Every morning you rehearse something. Every evening you reinforce something. Every thought either strengthens your future or strengthens your past. The decision rarely feels dramatic, but its consequences always are. Remember the principles we have uncovered. Identity is thought repeated. Repetition writes reality. Everything begins in the mind. These are not abstract ideas. They are the invisible architecture beneath every disciplined life, every lasting habit, and every meaningful transformation. Master your thoughts, and your actions will begin to follow. Master your repetitions, and your identity will quietly change. Master your identity, and the life you once believed impossible will slowly become the only life that feels natural. But another question now emerges. If thoughts create identity, can unwanted thoughts themselves be transformed into strength? Can fear become courage? Can anger become clarity? Can doubt become discipline? The ancient teachers believed the answer was yes. They called this remarkable process mental transmutation, the deliberate art of transforming the raw energy of the mind into a higher form. That is where our journey continues. Chapter 5. The Ancient Art of Mental Transmutation. If thoughts shape identity, an important question naturally follows. What happens when the thoughts themselves are destructive? What do you do when fear appears without invitation? When anger rises before reason? When doubt speaks louder than confidence? Most people believe they have only two choices: obey the thought or fight the thought. Ancient wisdom offers a third path. Transform the thought. This is one of the oldest and most misunderstood teachings in Hermetic philosophy. The ancient masters called it mental transmutation, not because the mind is magical, but because the mind is movable, flexible, trainable, just as fire can warm a home or destroy it. The same mental energy that produces fear can be redirected into awareness. The same energy that becomes anger can become courage. The same energy that becomes anxiety can become preparation. The energy is not the enemy, only its direction. Energy can be redirected. That simple sentence changes everything. Most people spend years trying to eliminate uncomfortable emotions. They tell themselves, I shouldn't feel afraid. I shouldn't be angry. I shouldn't be anxious. But notice what happens. The more they resist the emotion, the stronger it often becomes. Why? Because resistance is still attention, and attention strengthens whatever it repeatedly touches. The ancient teachers understood this long before psychology gave it a name. They knew that fighting the mind often gives the mind more power. Imagine standing in the ocean, trying to stop every wave with your hands. Impossible. The wiser approach is to learn how to move with the current instead of being overwhelmed by it. Your thoughts work the same way. They arrive, they rise, they fade. Not every thought deserves your obedience. That's the key. There is a profound difference between having a thought and becoming that thought. Most people never learn the difference. A fearful thought appears. Immediately, they believe it. An angry thought appears. Immediately, they act on it. A doubtful thought appears. Immediately, they assume it represents reality. But thoughts are visitors. They are not permanent residents. You have a choice. You can become the servant of every passing emotion, or you can become its observer. This is the beginning of mental freedom. Suppose you spend weeks preparing an important presentation. You work carefully. You give your best effort. When the meeting ends, a colleague criticizes your work. Immediately, the mind reacts. They don't respect me. I'm not good enough. I'll never succeed. Notice how quickly one comment becomes an entire identity. Most people react before they realize they are reacting. The criticism enters. The emotion rises. The response explodes. Then regret follows. The ancient philosophers warned against this automatic chain. Not because emotions are dangerous, because unconscious emotions become unconscious actions. The strongest people are not those who never feel emotion. They are those who create space between feeling and response. That space is where wisdom lives. Observe before you obey. Repeat that quietly. Observe before you obey. Because every emotion asks for movement. Anger asks you to attack. Fear asks you to retreat. Pride asks you to defend yourself. Envy asks you to compare. But emotions make poor leaders. They make excellent messengers. They tell you something deserves attention. They should not automatically decide what happens next. Imagine holding a burning piece of coal. Your first instinct is immediate reaction. But imagine instead that you pause. You breathe. You simply notice. I am angry. Not, I am an angry person. Those two statements are completely different. One describes a temporary experience. The other creates an identity. Observation separates you from identification. That separation creates freedom. Modern neuroscience confirms something remarkably similar. When we consciously name an emotion instead of immediately reacting to it, the brain begins shifting activity away from impulsive emotional centers toward regions associated with reasoning and self-control. The ancient teachers had no scientific instruments, yet they practiced this principle daily. They understood that awareness weakens automatic reactions. Awareness creates choice, and choice creates transformation. Observe before you obey. This principle becomes even more powerful when applied to ordinary life. Think about your evenings. Perhaps you finish work feeling mentally exhausted. Without thinking, your hand reaches for the phone. One notification becomes 20 minutes. 20 minutes becomes an hour. An hour becomes another late night. The next morning begins with frustration. Again, again, again. Most people assume this is simply a lack of discipline. But discipline is only part of the story. The deeper issue is automation. The behavior has become unconscious. No decision is being made. The pattern is simply repeating itself. Ancient wisdom teaches that freedom begins where unconscious repetition ends. That is why awareness is more powerful than force. Before changing the behavior, you must interrupt it. Interrupt the pattern. Rewrite the future. Consider a simple experiment. Tonight, when the urge to scroll appears, do not fight it immediately. Pause. Set the phone down for just 10 minutes. Sit quietly. Write one page in a journal. Reflect on your day. Walk outside. Breathe slowly. Notice what happens. The urge begins to change, not because the desire disappeared, because the automatic pattern was interrupted. That interruption may seem insignificant. It is not. Every interruption weakens the old identity. Every conscious choice strengthens the new one. That is how transformation actually happens. Not through giant leaps, through repeated interruptions. You have a choice. Every habit begins with a cue. Every cue invites a response. Between the cue and the response exists a moment. Small, almost invisible. Most people never notice it. Masters live inside it. Because inside that tiny space lies the greatest power you possess, the power to choose differently. Imagine someone who has complained for years whenever problems appear. Traffic, work, family, weather, everything becomes another reason to react. One day, they decide on a different practice. Whenever frustration appears, they ask one question. What is this situation asking me to learn? Nothing outside has changed. Traffic remains. Problems remain. Life remains unpredictable. But the direction of mental energy changes completely. The same frustration becomes curiosity. The same obstacle becomes training. The same difficulty becomes preparation. That is mental transmutation, not escaping reality. Transforming your relationship with reality. The ancient teachers often compared the human mind to an alchemist's laboratory. An ordinary person is ruled by raw emotional reactions. The alchemist transforms them. Fear becomes alertness. Failure becomes instruction. Criticism becomes refinement. Delay becomes patience. Loss becomes wisdom. Notice something remarkable. The external event never changed. Only the interpretation changed. Yet interpretation changes behavior. Behavior changes identity. Identity changes destiny. Energy can be redirected. This truth applies not only to emotions, but also to attention. When anxiety appears, ask, where can this energy be used productively? When anger appears, ask, what boundary needs to be strengthened? When disappointment appears, ask, what expectation must be released? Every difficult emotion contains energy. Your responsibility is to decide its direction. It's not about eliminating emotion. It's about mastering direction. It's not about becoming cold. It's about becoming conscious. It's not about controlling life. It's about controlling your response to life. Remember these principles. Energy can be redirected. Observe before you obey. Interrupt the pattern. Rewrite the future. These are not techniques reserved for monks or philosophers. They are practical disciplines available in every ordinary moment. Every conversation, every temptation, every disappointment, every decision. Because every day presents countless opportunities to transform unconscious reactions into conscious choices. And slowly, almost invisibly, those choices reshape the person you become. You no longer react because your emotions demand it. You respond because your principles guide it. That is the beginning of true mastery. But another timeless law now waits to be uncovered. If every thought creates movement, if every choice redirects energy, then where does every action ultimately lead? The ancient teachers answered with another universal principle. Nothing disappears. Every decision leaves a trace. Every action plants a seed. and every seed eventually produces a harvest. That is where our journey continues. Chapter 6. Every choice plants an invisible seed. One of the greatest illusions of human life is believing that today's choices disappear when today ends. They do not. Every thought leaves a trace. Every action leaves an imprint. Every decision begins a chain of consequences that continues long after the moment itself has passed. The ancient teachers understood this with remarkable clarity. They taught that life is not built through isolated events. It is built through accumulated causes. Nothing stands alone. Every visible result once existed as an invisible beginning. A towering oak tree was once an unnoticed seed. A magnificent cathedral began as a single stone. A disciplined life begins with one small decision that almost no one else notices. This is why they urged their students to think beyond the present moment. Not because the present is unimportant, because the present is where the future is planted. Every choice plants tomorrow. Those 4 words carry more wisdom than they first appear to. Most people judge a decision by its immediate reward. Ancient wisdom judges it by its long-term direction. That difference changes everything. Imagine placing $1 into a savings account every day. $1 feels insignificant. It cannot change your life today. Skipping one deposit seems equally insignificant. Yet years later, those tiny deposits become financial stability. The daily action remained almost invisible. The accumulated consequence became impossible to ignore. The same principle governs every part of life, not only money, knowledge, health, relationships, discipline, character, confidence. Everything grows through accumulation. That is why the wise rarely become obsessed with dramatic progress. They become devoted to consistent planting. Because they understand something most people overlook. The harvest is delayed, but it is never absent. You have a choice. You can become discouraged because today's effort seems invisible. Or you can remember that invisible work often produces the strongest foundations. Think about learning a new language. During the first week, progress feels almost non-existent. After 1 month, conversations still seem difficult. Many people quit. They conclude that the effort is not working. But the mind has been changing all along. Connections have been forming. Patterns have been strengthening. Vocabulary has been accumulating. Then one day, something unexpected happens. Words begin arriving naturally. Understanding becomes effortless. The learner calls it a breakthrough. The ancient teachers would simply call it the harvest. The breakthrough did not happen in one day. It happened through hundreds of invisible days that came before it. Every choice plants tomorrow. That is why impatience is one of the greatest enemies of transformation. We live in a culture that rewards immediate results, immediate entertainment, immediate delivery, immediate gratification. The mind slowly begins expecting everything to arrive instantly. But nature has never worked that way. Neither has character. Neither has wisdom. Neither has mastery. Seeds grow in silence. The strongest transformations are almost always invisible before they become obvious. That's the key. Never confuse invisibility with absence. Just because you cannot yet see the result does not mean the process is not unfolding. The same law explains why destructive habits often seem harmless in the beginning. One unhealthy meal changes very little. One missed workout appears unimportant. One night without enough sleep seems insignificant. One unnecessary purchase feels harmless. One lie appears forgettable. One angry reaction passes quickly. Viewed separately, none of these decisions seem capable of changing a life. Viewed together over 10 years, they become a completely different story. The harvest eventually arrives, whether we prepared for it or not. The ancient philosophers described this as the law of cause and effect. Every cause produces an effect. Every effect eventually becomes another cause. The chain never stops. The delay simply hides the connection. Nothing appears without a cause. This principle can be uncomfortable because it asks us to stop blaming coincidence for patterns we have quietly been creating. Imagine someone who neglects sleep for years. Late nights become normal. Stress becomes constant. Exercise disappears. Healthy meals become occasional. Nothing dramatic happens at first. The body adapts. The person concludes they have escaped the consequences. Then one day, fatigue becomes chronic. Blood pressure rises. Energy disappears. Illness arrives. People often ask, why did this happen? The ancient teachers would ask a different question. What invisible causes have been accumulating? The illness did not appear overnight. It matured quietly, just beyond awareness. The same principle applies to relationships. Trust is rarely destroyed by one conversation. It is weakened by repeated neglect, repeated dishonesty, repeated indifference. Then one day, someone says, "I don't know what happened." But something had been happening all along. The causes simply remained invisible until the effects became undeniable. The same law governs success. A respected leader is rarely created by one inspiring speech. They become trustworthy through years of keeping promises, listening carefully, acting consistently, choosing integrity when no one is watching. The public only sees the harvest. They rarely witness the planting. You have a choice. Instead of asking, "When will my life change?" ask, "What seeds am I planting today?" That question has the power to transform every ordinary decision, because every ordinary decision becomes extraordinary through repetition. The ancient teachers often reminded their students that destiny is rarely an accident. It is usually accumulated direction. This leads us to another forgotten truth. People often overestimate what they can accomplish in 1 month, yet dramatically underestimate what they can accomplish in 5 years. Why? Because the human mind struggles to appreciate gradual change. Gradual improvement feels invisible. Gradual decline feels invisible. Only dramatic outcomes capture attention. But life is built gradually, one page at a time, one conversation at a time, one workout at a time, one promise at a time. Imagine reading 20 pages every day. 20 pages seem insignificant. You finish. Close the book. Nothing extraordinary appears to happen. Now imagine continuing for 5 years. Thousands of pages. Hundreds of ideas. Entire ways of thinking transformed. Your vocabulary expands. Your judgment sharpens. Your confidence grows. People begin describing you as wise. They imagine wisdom appeared naturally. They never saw the 20 pages. Small actions become large outcomes. This principle is both encouraging and challenging. Encouraging because you do not need extraordinary effort to create extraordinary change. Challenging because you cannot escape the consequences of ordinary neglect. Every repeated action is writing tomorrow's biography. Every repeated thought is designing tomorrow's identity. Every repeated decision is shaping tomorrow's opportunities. That's the key. Your future is not waiting somewhere ahead of you. It is quietly being constructed inside today's routines. You don't need their permission. No one can stop you from planting better seeds. No one can prevent you from reading one chapter, saving $1, taking one walk, keeping one promise, speaking one honest sentence, choosing one better response. These actions appear almost invisible, yet invisible actions build visible lives. Think of a sculptor shaping marble. Each strike of the chisel removes only a tiny fragment. An observer might see almost no difference after a few minutes. But after thousands of careful strikes, a masterpiece emerges. Character is sculpted exactly the same way. Not by one dramatic decision, by countless ordinary ones. The ancient world understood patience because it understood growth. Modern life often forgets patience because it worships speed. But speed without direction produces exhaustion. Direction, patiently maintained, produces transformation. Remember these principles. Every choice plants tomorrow. Nothing appears without a cause. Small actions become large outcomes. These are not poetic ideas. They are timeless laws governing every relationship, every habit, every achievement, and every future version of yourself. The question is no longer whether your choices matter. They always do. The only question is what they are preparing you to harvest. Because every sunrise gives you another handful of seeds. And every sunset quietly records where you planted them. But another truth now emerges from these ancient laws. If every action creates a future, if every cause produces an effect, then who is ultimately responsible for the life being created? That question has challenged philosophers for thousands of years. Its answer is both uncomfortable and liberating. Because the greatest source of power begins where excuses finally end. That is where our journey continues. Chapter 7. Freedom begins the moment. Excuses end. There is one lesson that nearly every ancient tradition eventually leads to. Not because it is easy, because it is unavoidable. If you wish to transform your life, you must first reclaim ownership of it. Not ownership of everything that has happened to you. Life will always contain unfairness. People will disappoint you. Circumstances will change without warning. Loss will arrive uninvited. You cannot control every event, but you can always control one thing: your response. That is where real freedom begins. Not when life becomes easier. Not when the world becomes fair. Not when other people finally understand you. Freedom begins when excuses end. This truth often feels uncomfortable because modern culture frequently confuses responsibility with blame. They are not the same. Blame looks backward. Responsibility looks forward. Blame asks, "Whose fault is this?" Responsibility asks, "What can I do now?" One question creates helplessness. The other creates power. Responsibility creates freedom. The ancient philosophers understood something many people still resist. Power never begins with perfect circumstances. It begins with accepting influence over the part that belongs to you. Imagine two people missing the same important deadline. The first immediately explains why it happened. The meeting ran late. The internet failed. The schedule was unfair. The expectations were unreasonable. Perhaps every explanation is partly true, but notice what happens next. Nothing changes. The same pattern repeats. The same frustration returns. The second person experiences the exact same setback. But instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" they ask, "What system failed? What could I have anticipated? What will I do differently next time?" That single shift changes everything. Not because they are perfect, because they have placed themselves back in the position of influence. The deadline is already gone, but their power has returned. That is the key. Responsibility does not erase mistakes. It transforms mistakes into instruction. You have a choice. Every setback presents two possible identities. One says, "I am a victim of my circumstances." The other says, "I am a student of my circumstances." Only one of those identities continues growing. Ancient wisdom repeatedly reminds us that suffering becomes useful only when it teaches. Otherwise, it simply repeats. Think about a sailor crossing the ocean. He cannot command the wind. He cannot stop the storm. He cannot demand calm water. But he can adjust the sails. If he spends his entire journey arguing with the weather, he will drift endlessly. If he learns to respond to the conditions he cannot control, he eventually reaches his destination. Life asks the same of us. The storm is rarely the greatest obstacle. Refusing to adjust is. Responsibility creates freedom. There is another invisible force that quietly steals responsibility from our lives. Excuses. Excuses rarely sound dishonest. That is what makes them dangerous. They usually sound reasonable. "I'll start when things calm down." "I'm too busy." "I'm too tired." "I'll begin next Monday." "I just need more motivation." Most excuses contain a fragment of truth, but truth can still become a prison when it replaces action. The ancient teachers warned against waiting for perfect conditions, because perfect conditions never arrive. Life is movement, uncertainty, change. The person waiting for ideal circumstances is unknowingly waiting forever. Imagine a writer who dreams of publishing a book. Every day they promise themselves they will begin tomorrow. Tomorrow becomes next week. Next week becomes next month. Years pass. The dream remains untouched. Not because they lacked talent, because they repeatedly chose comfort over discomfort. One comfortable decision rarely changes a life. Thousands of comfortable decisions always do. Comfort delays transformation. Read those words carefully. Comfort delays transformation. Comfort is not the enemy. Rest has value. Recovery has value. Peace has value. But there is a difference between rest and avoidance. One restores strength. The other quietly weakens character. Many people mistake avoidance for self-care. They tell themselves they are protecting their peace. In reality, they are protecting their fear. That distinction matters. Growth almost always asks you to enter temporary discomfort. The difficult conversation, the first workout, the honest apology, the unfamiliar opportunity, the uncomfortable truth. These moments rarely feel pleasant, yet they become the doorway to transformation. You have a choice. Every day, you are deciding which discomfort to embrace. the discomfort of discipline, or the discomfort of regret. One disappears quickly. The other quietly grows heavier with time. The ancient philosophers often observed that pain itself is not optional. The question is only which form you choose: temporary effort or permanent disappointment. That's the key. The mind will always offer comfort first. Wisdom chooses growth instead. There is another excuse hidden beneath almost every other excuse. I don't feel like it. Few sentences possess greater influence over human behavior. Imagine allowing your emotions to determine every important decision. You only exercise when you feel inspired. You only save money when spending feels inconvenient. You only tell the truth when honesty feels comfortable. You only work when motivation appears. How stable would your life become? Not very, because feelings are temporary. Principles endure. Ancient wisdom never taught people to eliminate emotion. It taught them to stop placing emotion in command. Emotion is weather. Character is direction. One changes constantly. The other must remain steady. This brings us to one of the greatest transformations the human mind can experience: the shift from victimhood to ownership. Victimhood does not always announce itself dramatically. Sometimes it appears quietly. If my parents had been different, if my boss appreciated me, if society were fair, if I had started earlier, if I had more talent. Notice the common pattern. Power is always placed somewhere else. The future becomes dependent upon circumstances beyond personal influence. Ancient wisdom interrupts that pattern. It asks a different question. Given this reality, what remains possible? That single question restores movement. Imagine failing an important interview. One person spends months replaying the unfairness of the experience. Resentment grows. Confidence shrinks. No new opportunities are pursued. Another person experiences the same rejection. They feel disappointed. But after the emotion settles, they begin examining the experience. What questions caught me unprepared? What skills can I strengthen? What did this experience teach me? The same event. Two different interpretations. Two completely different futures. Because interpretation determines direction. Own the cause. Change the effect. This principle does not deny hardship. It does not pretend injustice never exists. It simply refuses to surrender personal power to it. The ancient teachers knew something remarkable. Every moment of ownership expands the mind. Every excuse contracts it. Ownership says, I can grow. Excuses whisper, I can only wait. Ownership creates possibility. Excuses preserve limitation. You don't need their permission. You do not need permission to take responsibility for your future. You do not need permission to become disciplined. You do not need permission to forgive, to begin again, to change direction, to rewrite old patterns. No one can give you authority over your own life, because it has always belonged to you. The question is whether you're willing to claim it. Think back to everything we have explored so far. Every promise you keep shapes your identity. Every hidden belief governs your actions. Every thought strengthens your self-image. Every emotion can be redirected. Every choice plants tomorrow. Now, another truth becomes unavoidable. If these laws are real, then your future cannot simply be something that happens to you. It becomes something you participate in creating, one decision at a time, one response at a time, one act of ownership at a time. Remember these principles. Responsibility creates freedom. Comfort delays transformation. Own the cause. Change the effect. These are not harsh commands. They are invitations. Invitations to reclaim the power that excuses quietly steal. Because the moment you stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and begin asking, "What is this asking of me?" your life begins moving in a completely different direction. That is the beginning of freedom. Not freedom from difficulty. Freedom from helplessness. But one final challenge still remains. Even after taking responsibility, even after choosing growth over excuses, there is one person whose approval most people continue chasing: the approval of everyone else. The ancient teachers warned that no lasting discipline is possible until you become your own authority, because the strongest character is built in private, long before the world ever notices. That is where our journey continues. Chapter 8. The Discipline of Becoming Your Own Authority. There comes a moment in every person's life when they must answer a quiet but decisive question. Who is really in charge of my life? Not who influences you. Not who advises you. Not who criticizes you. Who leads you when no one else is watching? Most people spend years believing they are independent, but if you observe carefully, much of their behavior is still controlled by invisible audiences. They work harder when someone is watching. They become disciplined when a deadline is approaching. They exercise because they posted a goal online. They speak carefully because someone might judge them. Remove the audience, remove the pressure, remove the recognition, and suddenly the discipline disappears. This reveals an uncomfortable truth. Many people are not being led by principles. They are being led by observation. The ancient philosophers warned against this long ago. A person who depends upon external pressure will always remain emotionally dependent on external circumstances. The strongest life is built from an inner authority, an authority that remains steady whether applause arrives or not. Become your own witness. Those words carry enormous power. Because the person who quietly observes your life every day is you. Long after the compliments fade, long after the criticism disappears, long after success or failure passes, you remain. Your own witness, your own judge, your own teacher, your own student. That is why true discipline begins in private. Imagine two people training at a gym. The first trains intensely only when others are present. They enjoy admiration, competition, recognition. The second trains exactly the same way, whether the room is full or empty. Nothing changes. The effort remains. The commitment remains. The standard remains. Who is more disciplined? Not the one receiving attention. The one whose behavior remains unchanged without it. That is internal leadership. You have a choice. You can borrow discipline from external pressure, or you can build discipline from internal character. One disappears when circumstances change. The other becomes part of who you are. That's the key. If your standards depend on the presence of other people, then other people still control your behavior. Freedom begins when your principles become stronger than your audience. This idea appears repeatedly throughout ancient wisdom. The wise person does not ask, "Who is watching?" They ask, What kind of person am I becoming? That question transforms ordinary moments into opportunities for character. You decide whether to return the shopping cart. No one notices. You decide whether to tell the truth when lying would be easier. No one may ever discover it. You decide whether to wake up when the alarm rings. The room is silent. These moments seem insignificant, yet they are the moments that quietly define you. Character is built where applause is absent. Every unseen decision is a vote for the person you are becoming. Become your own witness. There is another misunderstanding that quietly weakens discipline. Many people believe self-respect comes from achievement. The ancient teachers believed the opposite. Achievement often follows self-respect, not the other way around. Think about someone who constantly breaks promises to themselves. They promise to exercise. They quit. Promise to study. They postpone. Promise to save money. They spend impulsively. Each broken promise appears isolated, but beneath the surface, something much larger is happening. Trust is disappearing. Not trust from others, trust in themselves. Without trust, self-respect slowly erodes. Now imagine someone else. They choose one simple commitment. 10 minutes of reading every morning. No audience. No social media post. No celebration. Just quiet consistency. After 30 days, something changes. The reading itself matters, but something even more valuable has been created. Evidence. Evidence that this person does what they say they will do. That evidence becomes confidence. Confidence becomes self-respect. Self-respect becomes identity. Private victories create public strength. The world often celebrates visible success. Ancient wisdom celebrates invisible preparation. Because public confidence is usually built upon years of private discipline. When you admire an accomplished musician, you're seeing thousands of unseen practice sessions. When you admire a wise leader, you're seeing years of unseen decisions. When you admire someone who remains calm under pressure, you're witnessing the result of countless private moments where they learned to govern themselves. The public only sees the harvest. The roots remain hidden. You have a choice. Stop asking, "How do I impress other people?" Start asking, "What promises have I made to myself?" That question changes your relationship with discipline. Because discipline is no longer something you perform. It becomes someone you are. You don't need their permission. You do not need permission to become trustworthy. You do not need permission to become dependable. You do not need permission to quietly improve. Some of the most important victories in your life will never be witnessed by another person. That does not make them smaller. It makes them more valuable, because they belong entirely to you. The ancient philosophers believed that integrity was one of the highest human virtues. Integrity simply means wholeness. The outer life and the inner life agree. The words and the actions agree. The promises and the behavior agree. A divided person says one thing and lives another. An integrated person becomes stable. That stability creates extraordinary strength. Imagine someone working on an important project. The excitement of the beginning fades. Progress becomes slow. The work becomes repetitive. No one is encouraging them. No one even knows how much effort remains. At this point, motivation disappears. What happens next? For many people, the project quietly dies. Not because they lacked ability, because they expected motivation to carry them all the way. Motivation was never designed to do that. Motivation starts the journey. Integrity finishes it. Integrity outlasts motivation. This may be one of the most practical lessons in the entire audiobook. Feelings change. Energy changes. Circumstances change. Your principles must not. If your behavior changes every time your emotions change, your identity will always remain unstable. But if your principles remain constant, your emotions gradually learn to follow your leadership instead of directing it. The strongest people are not emotionless. They simply refuse to negotiate with every passing feeling. Imagine a bridge built across a river. Storms come. The water rises. The wind changes. Yet the bridge remains because it was anchored deeply. Character works the same way. A person anchored in principles does not collapse every time life becomes uncomfortable. Not because they never struggle, because they have decided in advance who they intend to be. That's the key. The greatest decisions are often made long before the moment arrives. You decide today that honesty is non-negotiable. Then tomorrow's temptation loses much of its power. You decide today that your morning routine matters. Then tomorrow's excuses become easier to recognize. You decide today that your word means something. Then each future promise becomes stronger. This is how identity stabilizes. Not through dramatic transformation, through repeated integrity, again and again and again. The ancient teachers often compared character to a fortress, not because it separates you from the world, because it protects what matters most. A fortress is not built in one day. Neither is character. Stone by stone. Choice by choice. Promise by promise. The same process continues throughout a lifetime. Remember these principles. Become your own witness. Private victories create public strength. Integrity outlasts motivation. These are not merely inspiring phrases. They are timeless disciplines that quietly separate people who depend upon circumstances from those who create them. The world will always offer applause one day and criticism the next. Success will come. Failure will come. Recognition will come. Silence will come. If your identity depends upon those changing conditions, your peace will always remain fragile. But if your authority comes from within, if your standards remain unchanged, if your integrity becomes stronger than your emotions, then your life acquires a kind of stability that no circumstance can easily take away. And once you become your own authority, another remarkable possibility appears. Discipline no longer feels like constant resistance. It begins to feel natural. Your environment starts supporting your character instead of fighting against it. Your daily routines become allies instead of obstacles. The ancient teachers understood that mastery is not only about changing yourself, it is also about designing a life that makes your highest self easier to become. That is where our journey continues. Chapter 9. Designing a Life. Where integrity becomes automatic. By now, one truth should be impossible to ignore. Your life is not shaped by a few extraordinary decisions. It is shaped by thousands of ordinary ones. The promises you keep, the thoughts you repeat, the emotions you redirect, the responsibility you accept, the integrity you practice. Each of these has quietly been building your character. But there is still one important lesson the ancient teachers insisted upon. Willpower alone is never enough. Even the strongest mind becomes exhausted when it must fight the same battle every single day. Wisdom asks a different question. Instead of asking, "How can I become stronger?" it asks, "How can I make the right choice easier?" That is the beginning of true mastery. The wise do not merely discipline themselves, they design their lives. Because they understand something most people overlook. Your environment is always teaching you how to behave. Whether you realize it or not, every object around you sends instructions. Every room encourages certain habits. Every routine reinforces a particular identity. The environment is never neutral. It is either quietly supporting your future or quietly strengthening your past. Design defeats temptation. Think carefully about your own surroundings. Imagine walking into a workspace. Your phone sits directly beside your keyboard. Social media is already open. Notifications flash every few minutes. The television plays softly in the background. The room is cluttered. Your attention is being invited in 100 different directions. Now imagine another workspace. The phone is in another room. The desk contains only the tools required for one important task. The room is quiet. The next action is obvious. Which environment demands less willpower? The answer is obvious. Yet most people continue blaming themselves instead of redesigning their surroundings. Ancient wisdom teaches that intelligence is not constantly resisting temptation. Intelligence is reducing unnecessary temptation before it appears. You have a choice. You can fight the same distractions every day, or you can remove many of them before the battle even begins. That is not weakness. It is wisdom. Imagine trying to grow a healthy tree. Would you blame the seed if it struggled in poor soil? Of course not. You would improve the environment. More sunlight, better water, healthier ground. Yet people often expect themselves to thrive while living inside environments that constantly encourage distraction. The ancient teachers understood that conditions influence outcomes. Character matters. But conditions matter too. This is why designing your environment is an act of self-respect. It is not about making discipline unnecessary. It is about making discipline sustainable. Design defeats temptation. The modern world often celebrates people who constantly resist temptation. Ancient wisdom quietly admired those who needed to resist it less often because they designed wisely. There is another principle hidden beneath this idea. Most people rely on motivation. The wise rely on systems. Motivation feels exciting. It arrives unexpectedly. It fills you with energy. It convinces you that this time everything will be different. Then it disappears. The ancient philosophers never expected emotion to remain constant. Why should motivation? Feelings rise. Feelings fall. Systems remain. Imagine someone who exercises only when they feel inspired. Some weeks they train 5 times. Other weeks they disappear completely. Now imagine another person. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 in the morning, they train. Not because they always feel motivated, because the decision has already been made. The calendar removes negotiation. The routine removes uncertainty. The system removes excuses. Years later, who is healthier? The answer has very little to do with motivation. It has everything to do with structure. Systems create freedom. At first, this sounds backwards. Many people believe routines limit freedom. Ancient wisdom teaches the opposite. Good systems protect freedom. Imagine never deciding what time to sleep, never deciding when to work, never deciding how to manage money. Every day becomes another exhausting series of decisions. Decision after decision slowly drains attention. Mental energy disappears. Eventually, discipline collapses. Not because you are weak, because every unnecessary decision consumes strength. A system removes thousands of those decisions. It quietly says, "This is simply what we do." Notice how peaceful that sentence feels. Not, "I wonder if I should exercise today." Simply, "I exercise on Mondays." Not, "I hope I find time to read." Simply, "I read before bed." Systems transform difficult decisions into ordinary routines. That is one of the highest forms of wisdom. You have a choice. Depend on changing emotions, or depend on reliable structures. One changes every morning. The other quietly builds your future. Think about brushing your teeth. You probably do not negotiate with yourself every evening. You do not wait for inspiration. You do not seek motivation. The behavior has become automatic. Identity performs it without discussion. Ancient teachers recognized that the highest level of discipline eventually feels natural. Not because effort disappears, because resistance disappears. That is the purpose of systems, not endless struggle, effortless consistency. That's the key. Do not ask yourself every day whether you should become the person you already decided to become. Let your systems answer that question for you. This leads to the final principle of this chapter. Repeated alignment eventually becomes identity. Many people mistakenly believe identity changes first. Ancient wisdom reveals something subtler. Identity grows through repeated alignment between your values and your actions. Imagine someone who dreams of becoming a writer. They wait for inspiration. Some weeks they write thousands of words. Other weeks they write nothing. Years pass. The dream remains unfinished. Now imagine another writer. Every morning, 6 o'clock, 1 hour. No negotiation. Some mornings the words flow beautifully. Other mornings they struggle through every sentence. It does not matter. The appointment is honored. 5 years later, something remarkable has happened. Writing no longer feels like a task. It feels like part of who they are. Identity quietly emerged from consistency, not inspiration. Consistency creates character. The same principle governs every meaningful transformation. A disciplined person is simply someone who has repeated disciplined behavior long enough that it feels normal. A generous person repeatedly chooses generosity. A courageous person repeatedly chooses courage. A truthful person repeatedly chooses honesty. Character is accumulated alignment. One decision rarely defines you. Thousands of similar decisions eventually do. The ancient world often compared rivers to human character. A river does not carve stone through one powerful movement. It shapes mountains through continuous flow, almost unnoticed. Day after day, year after year. Your identity develops exactly the same way. Not through one extraordinary effort, through quiet repetition, again, again, again. You don't need their permission. You do not need permission to redesign your environment. You do not need permission to simplify your routines. You do not need permission to create systems that protect your future. Some people will misunderstand your consistency. Some will call it boring, rigid, predictable. Let them. Ancient wisdom reminds us that greatness often appears ordinary while it is being built. The world celebrates dramatic moments. The wise celebrate sustainable habits. Because habits quietly accomplish what inspiration alone never can. Think back over everything we have discovered. You learned that broken promises weaken identity. You uncovered the hidden laws governing behavior. You discovered that thoughts become self-image. You practiced transforming emotion instead of obeying it. You saw that every choice plants tomorrow. You accepted responsibility. You became your own authority. Now you understand something even deeper. Lasting transformation is not maintained through heroic effort. It is maintained through intelligent design. Remember these principles. Design defeats temptation. Systems create freedom. Consistency creates character. These are not productivity techniques. They are timeless principles for building a life where integrity no longer depends on mood, pressure, or perfect circumstances. Eventually, the person you're trying so hard to become today simply becomes the person you naturally are. And when that happens, discipline no longer feels like resistance. It becomes your nature. But one final lesson remains. After all the habits have been built, after the systems are in place, after integrity has become part of your identity, how do you continue living wisely for the rest of your life? The ancient teachers answered with one final principle: awareness. Because mastery is not a destination. It is a way of seeing. That is where our journey concludes. Chapter 10. Living in Alignment. With the hidden laws of the mind. We have traveled through many ideas together. We have explored promises, identity, thought, attention, responsibility, integrity, discipline. But beneath every chapter, there has always been one invisible thread connecting them all. Awareness. Without awareness, knowledge remains information. With awareness, knowledge becomes transformation. This is the final lesson the ancient teachers hoped every student would eventually discover. Mastery is not found in controlling every circumstance. It is found in seeing clearly, because the moment you truly see yourself, you become capable of changing yourself. That is the beginning of freedom. Not freedom from the world. Freedom from unconscious living. Awareness changes everything. These words may seem simple, but they describe one of the most profound shifts a human being can experience. Think about how most days unfold. The alarm rings. The hand reaches for the phone. Messages appear. News appears. Opinions appear. Before the day has truly begun, your attention already belongs to someone else. Hours pass. You react. You hurry. You answer. You consume. You solve problems. You become busy. Then night arrives. The day ends. And you quietly wonder why life feels like something happening to you rather than something you're consciously creating. The ancient philosophers warned against this long before smartphones existed. They understood that an unconscious life is always directed by external forces. Whoever controls your attention eventually influences your direction. Whoever repeatedly shapes your thinking gradually shapes your identity. That is why awareness is more than observation. It is leadership. The moment you notice a thought before believing it, you become free. The moment you notice anger before expressing it, you become free. The moment you notice fear before obeying it, you become free. That small space between awareness and reaction contains your greatest power. You have a choice. Always. Perhaps not over the event itself, but always over your response. That's the key. Life does not become meaningful because circumstances improve. Life becomes meaningful because awareness improves. Imagine someone who has spent years criticizing themselves. Every mistake becomes another reason to feel inadequate. Every challenge becomes another reminder of failure. The inner voice repeats familiar phrases. I'll never change. I'm not good enough. It is just who I am. For years, those thoughts operate automatically. Then one morning, something different happens. The thought appears. But instead of immediately believing it, the person simply notices it. There is that voice again. Nothing dramatic happens. No fireworks. No instant transformation. Only awareness. Yet everything has changed, because for the first time, the thought has been observed instead of obeyed. The chain has been interrupted. Choice has returned. That is how transformation begins. Not through force, through seeing. Awareness changes everything. The ancient teachers often compared awareness to carrying a lantern through a dark room. The furniture was always there. The walls were always there. The obstacles were always there. The lantern did not create reality. It revealed it. Wisdom works exactly the same way. It does not invent truth. It uncovers what has always been present. This is why awareness requires honesty. You must become willing to observe yourself without excuses, without self-hatred, without self-deception, simply seeing. How often do I break promises? What repeatedly captures my attention? What stories do I keep telling myself? What fears quietly govern my decisions? Those questions are uncomfortable, but discomfort often protects the doorway to wisdom. The ancient world never encouraged endless self-criticism. It encouraged clear self-observation. Because only what becomes visible can become different. This awareness must eventually become practical. Otherwise, philosophy remains entertainment. Knowledge without application changes nothing. The ancient teachers never intended wisdom to remain inside books. They intended it to become a way of living. Imagine beginning each morning differently. Not with notifications. Not with arguments. Not with endless consumption. Instead, 5 quiet minutes. A notebook. A simple question. What kind of person will I practice becoming today? Notice the wording. Not, what will happen today? Not, what might go wrong? Not, what will everyone else think of me? Only, what kind of person will I practice becoming today? That one question quietly reorganizes your attention. It reminds you that identity is built intentionally, not accidentally. Imagine ending each evening the same way. Instead of asking, was today successful? Ask, did I live according to my principles? Success depends upon many things beyond your control. Integrity does not. This is why the ancient teachers measured life differently. Not by applause, not by wealth alone, not by recognition, but by alignment. Did your actions agree with your values? Did your words agree with your intentions? Did your choices agree with the person you wish to become? Live by principle, not impulse. That sentence may be one of the greatest practical lessons in this entire audiobook. Impulses constantly change. Principles remain. Impulses seek comfort. Principles seek growth. Impulses react. Principles respond. Impulses ask, "What do I feel?" Principles ask, "What is right?" One creates instability. The other creates peace. You have a choice every ordinary day, every ordinary hour, every ordinary moment, to live by impulse or to live by principle. The difference may seem invisible today. It never remains invisible forever. The final transformation the ancient teachers hoped their students would experience was not becoming wealthy, not becoming famous, not becoming admired. It was becoming trustworthy. Not trustworthy to the world first, trustworthy to themselves. Think back to where this audiobook began. You asked why people break promises to themselves. Now perhaps you see a different answer. Promises are not broken because people are weak. They are broken because identity has not yet become aligned with principle. But when awareness grows, when integrity grows, when repeated actions strengthen trust, something extraordinary happens. You stop negotiating with yourself. The promise no longer feels heavy, because it no longer feels optional. It feels natural. Imagine waking before the alarm because your routine has become part of who you are. Imagine exercising because movement feels like self-respect rather than punishment. Imagine telling the truth because honesty no longer requires courage. Imagine choosing patience because your first instinct is no longer reaction. This is not perfection. It is alignment. The greatest victory is not forcing yourself to become someone else. It is becoming someone you no longer have to force. The strongest promise is the one you keep to yourself. Notice that no applause is required, no audience, no recognition, only quiet integrity. The world may never know how many promises you kept in private, but your mind knows. Your character knows. Your future knows. The strongest people rarely announce their discipline. They simply live it. Again and again and again. That is why trust in yourself becomes one of life's greatest forms of freedom. When you trust yourself, decisions become clearer. Fear loses much of its authority. Doubt becomes quieter. Because experience has already answered the question. You know who you are, not because you said so, because you proved it. One promise at a time. One choice at a time. One ordinary day at a time. You don't need their permission. You do not need permission to become the author of your own life. You do not need permission to live intentionally. You do not need permission to honor your own standards. You have already been given the only authorities that truly matters. The authority to choose. Every morning, every conversation, every temptation, every promise. Remember what we have uncovered throughout this journey. Every promise shapes the person who makes it. The inner law always governs the outer result. A divided mind creates divided results. Identity is thought repeated. Energy can be redirected. Every choice plants tomorrow. Responsibility creates freedom. Integrity outlasts motivation. Consistency creates character. Awareness changes everything. These are not merely ideas to admire. They are principles to practice. Because wisdom never changes a life by being remembered. It changes a life by being lived. So when this audiobook ends, do not try to change everything. Choose one promise, one principle, one action. Keep it today. Keep it tomorrow. Then keep it again. One day, you will look back and realize something remarkable. Your life did not change because of one extraordinary moment. It changed because thousands of ordinary moments were finally lived with extraordinary awareness. Live by principle, not impulse. The strongest promise is the one you keep to yourself. And in the end, that is the promise that quietly transforms every other part of your life. Throughout this audiobook, we have uncovered a truth that has been quietly shaping your life all along. Every promise you keep or break does more than change your schedule. It changes your identity. You have seen that discipline is not merely a matter of effort. It is the natural result of living in harmony with the hidden laws of the mind. You have learned that thoughts become identity. Identity shapes action. Action creates habit. And habit ultimately becomes destiny. You have seen that every choice plants a seed. That excuses weaken the mind while responsibility strengthens it. That integrity is built in private, long before it is recognized in public. Most importantly, you have discovered that the greatest battle is never against time, circumstances, or other people. It is against the quiet habit of betraying your own word. The ancient teachers understood something that modern life often forgets. The mind is not your enemy. It is your instrument. And like every instrument, it responds to the way it is trained. Beginning today, choose one promise. Not 10, not 20, just one. Keep it. Then keep it again tomorrow, and the next day. Because every fulfilled promise reshapes the architecture of your mind. The hidden laws discussed in this audiobook will continue operating long after this recording ends. They govern every decision, every habit, and every future version of yourself, whether you acknowledge them or not. The question is no longer why you couldn't keep promises to yourself. The question is this: now that you understand the laws, who will you choose to become?